The morning air is already heavy. Volcanic sand clings to boots and weapons alike, turning every step into resistance. Smoke drifts low across the ground, pushed sideways by coastal wind and the shock of distant naval guns. Somewhere ahead, a narrow slit in dark earth flashes, then disappears. Another bunker. Still alive. It is late in the Pacific War. The island is small on maps, but vast when crossed on foot. Here, the ground has been hollowed out, reinforced, measured. Nothing is accidental. A Marine moves forward in short bursts. Not alone. A second man stays close. Close enough to share danger, close enough that distance would be fatal. Between them, they carry a weapon that was never meant for comfort or endurance, only results. Gunfire cracks overhead. Fragments of rock and steel tear into the air. Each bunker is a problem that must be solved at arm's length. There is no wide front here. Only angles. Timing. Breath. Minutes begin to compress. One position goes silent. Then another. The line shifts forward, not by yards, but by moments. And to understand how this kind of advance became possible, we have to step back. To the war that built these defenses, and the doctrine designed to break them. By early 1945, the Pacific War had narrowed into a brutal geometry of distance and denial. Island by island, the United States was pushing westward, closing the gap toward the Japanese home islands. Each advance shortened bomber routes, tightened naval pressure, and reduced Japan's strategic depth. But every mile forward demanded a price. The fighting no longer resembled sweeping maneuvers or mobile campaigns. It had become a contest of endurance against prepared ground. Japanese commanders, drawing on lessons from earlier defeats, abandoned the idea of defending beaches at all costs. Instead, they turned inward, literally. Defense was now built below the surface, anchored in tunnels, chambers, and interlocking bunkers cut into rock and volcanic soil. These positions were designed not to stop landings, but to bleed attackers afterward. This approach reached its most refined form on islands like Iwo Jima. Here, the terrain itself became a weapon. Soft ash swallowed vehicles. Hard rock resisted explosives. Every ridge concealed firing points that could survive bombardment and reappear minutes later. Facing this system was the United States Marine Corps, an assault force trained for amphibious warfare but forced to adapt to underground combat. Standard infantry tactics, fire and maneuver, flanking, suppression, often stalled against enemies who could not be easily seen or fixed in place. Artillery and naval guns could collapse entrances, but rarely eliminated the defenders inside. Time became the most dangerous variable. The longer a bunker remained active, the more casualties accumulated around it. Each strongpoint pinned down entire platoons, slowing advances across terrain measured in hundreds of yards but defended as if it were miles deep. Japanese defenders, many operating under the doctrine of the Imperial Japanese Army, understood this balance well. They were not expected to survive indefinitely. They were expected to delay, long enough to make every gain feel disproportionate to its size. It was within this environment, where ground could not be bypassed and delay equaled death, that new assault methods became essential. The battlefield demanded solutions measured not in days, but in minutes. And those solutions would soon be tested at the closest possible range. The bunker systems confronting Marine units were not isolated positions. They were networks, engineered to function as living organisms beneath the ground. A firing slit destroyed at the surface rarely meant the position was neutralized. Defenders could withdraw through tunnels, reappear through a secondary aperture, or fire from an entirely different angle within moments. This forced American units into a problem without a clean solution. If a bunker was bypassed, it became a threat to supply lines and rear elements. If it was assaulted directly, the attacker entered a kill zone measured in feet rather than yards. Conventional rifle fire was largely ineffective. Machine guns could suppress openings, but suppression ended the moment fire shifted elsewhere. Grenades helped, but only if they reached the interior chambers, which were often deep, angled, or protected by blast baffles. What emerged was a reliance on specialized two-man assault teams. These teams were built around weapons that could deliver decisive force at point-blank range. Their effectiveness depended on proximity, coordination, and timing, three factors that magnified both their power and their vulnerability. One man carried the primary weapon. The second protected him, managed ammunition or fuel, and watched for threats emerging from unexpected directions. Neither role could function alone. The loss of either man often meant the failure of the entire assault. These teams did not operate independently. They advanced under covering fire, exploiting brief windows when enemy fire slackened or shifted. When they reached a bunker, the engagement unfolded in seconds, sometimes faster than observers could fully register. Speed mattered because bunker complexes were interconnected. The destruction of one position often exposed the next. Momentum prevented defenders from reorganizing, redeploying, or counterattacking through the tunnel network. In this environment, the difference between 10 minutes and 30 minutes was measured in bodies. A rapid collapse of multiple bunkers could open an entire sector. A delay could stall an assault for an entire day. This reality placed extraordinary weight on individual actions. Not because doctrine suddenly disappeared, but because doctrine relied on small units executing under extreme pressure. And as these teams moved forward, their success or failure began to shape the battle in ways far beyond their immediate position. Close-range assault in the Pacific was not defined by aggression alone. It was defined by control, of breathing, of movement, of fear. For the Marines assigned to two-man assault teams, every advance demanded absolute trust in the man beside them. There was no space for hesitation or confusion. The distance between success and death was often no more than a few steps. The physical strain was immediate. Protective gear trapped heat. Weapons designed for short bursts became heavy within minutes. Every movement through loose volcanic soil drained strength faster than expected. Yet stopping was rarely an option. A stalled team was an exposed team. Fear did not arrive all at once. It accumulated. With each bunker cleared, the mind carried the knowledge that another waited ahead, possibly with a clearer line of fire, possibly with defenders who had learned from the last engagement. The ability to continue under these conditions was not about heroism. It was about narrowing focus until only the next action mattered. From a tactical standpoint, bunker destruction was not a matter of attrition, it was a race. Each functioning bunker anchored overlapping fields of fire. As long as it remained active, it limited maneuver options for surrounding units. Two-man teams allowed assaults to stay narrow and controlled. Rather than committing large numbers to a single strongpoint, commanders could apply concentrated force at the precise moment and location required. This minimized exposure while maximizing effect. The key was sequencing. Covering fire suppressed visible apertures. Assault teams moved during those moments of reduced enemy fire. Once a bunker was neutralized, attention shifted immediately to the next position before defenders could react through underground connections. The two-man weapon at the center of these assaults was not sophisticated by modern standards. Its effectiveness came from simplicity and proximity. It delivered overwhelming force directly into confined spaces where defenders had no room to escape its effects. But the weapon imposed severe constraints. Range was limited. Exposure was unavoidable. Missteps were unforgiving. Its use demanded calm execution under fire, something that could not be taught in classrooms alone. And while its impact was immediate, its operators paid a price measured in exhaustion, risk, and constant vulnerability. Yet even as these assaults succeeded, the enemy was adapting. From inside the bunker systems, the battlefield looked very different. Japanese defenders rarely saw the full assault. Their view was limited to firing slits, tunnel junctions, and the narrow ground immediately in front of their positions. Orders emphasized concealment, discipline, and patience. Defenders were instructed to allow attackers to advance before opening fire. This conserved ammunition and increased effectiveness at close range. The goal was not to repel the assault outright, but to slow it, forcing repeated attacks against prepared positions. When a bunker was threatened, Defenders relied on tunnel networks to reposition or reinforce nearby points. But rapid destruction disrupted this system. Collapsed entrances blocked movement. Smoke and debris filled passages. Communication broke down. What unsettled defenders most was speed. When multiple bunkers fell in quick succession, the assumptions underlying the defensive plan no longer held. Units became isolated. Counterattacks failed to materialize. Leadership at this level was often invisible. Decisions were made without radios, maps, or clear lines of sight. Non-commissioned officers and team leaders relied on instinct, experience, and observation. Timing an assault required reading subtle cues, changes in enemy fire, shifts in smoke, the sound of explosions ahead. Orders were often gestures or brief shouted instructions. Once a team moved, there was little opportunity to intervene. This placed enormous responsibility on individuals operating far from direct supervision. Success depended on initiative balanced by discipline. Too much caution invited failure. Too much speed invited disaster. Close combat inside fortified positions left little emotional distance. The outcome was immediate and final. There was no anonymity, no abstraction. Many Marines later described these engagements as the most psychologically taxing of the war. Not because of the violence itself, but because of its intimacy and repetition. Bunker after bunker, the pattern repeated: advance, assault, silence. These experiences shaped not only the battle, but the men who survived it. And as this pressure mounted across the front, events in one narrow sector began to accelerate toward a decisive moment. The assault began without ceremony. There was no clear signal, no dramatic pause. Only a brief thinning of enemy fire, just enough to be noticed by those watching for it. The two-man team moved. They advanced low, using shallow depressions and the uneven texture of the ground to mask their approach. Covering fire shifted forward, pinning visible apertures while the team closed the distance. At this range, sound collapsed into fragments. Gunfire, shouted warnings, the hollow concussion of explosions against rock. The first bunker was engaged at close range. The weapon was brought forward, aimed not with precision but with intent. The effect was immediate. Fire ceased. Smoke poured outward, thick and choking, marking the position as neutralized. There was no pause to confirm. The team moved on. The second bunker lay less than 20 yards away, connected by a shallow trench partially collapsed by earlier bombardment. Enemy fire resumed from a new angle, probing, adjusting. Rounds snapped overhead. Fragments struck the ground inches away. Again, the team closed. Again, the engagement lasted seconds rather than minutes. By the time the third bunker fell, the rhythm had changed. Observers behind the line could feel it. The enemy's pattern, fire, withdrawal, reappearance, was breaking down. Tunnel exits clogged with debris. Secondary firing slits failed to activate in time. Minutes compressed. The team advanced in short bursts, each engagement bleeding into the next. The fourth. The fifth. Communication between units was fragmentary, but the results were visible. A stretch of ground that had pinned down Marines for hours was suddenly passable. Platoons edged forward, exploiting the opening before it could close. By the 10th bunker, exhaustion was no longer theoretical. Movement slowed. Breathing became audible even under fire. The margin for error narrowed to almost nothing. And still, the team advanced, because stopping now would expose everything gained behind them. Ahead, the remaining bunkers formed a final cluster. Interconnected. Mutually supporting. Withdrawal was no longer an option. Only completion. The final cluster of bunkers sat slightly higher than the ground already taken. Not enough to be called a ridge, but enough to command the approaches below. From here, Japanese fire had once overlapped perfectly, locking the sector in place. Now, it came in uneven bursts. The team adjusted without discussion. There was no time. Covering fire shifted again, brief and intense, forcing defenders to keep their heads down. The two Marines moved in sequence, one advancing, one guarding, closing the last distances that still mattered. The 11th bunker went silent first. Its entrance collapsed inward, sealing off part of the tunnel network beneath it. Moments later, a secondary position attempted to fire, then stopped abruptly. The 12th required a different approach. The opening was narrow, angled sharply to deflect blasts and fragments. The team waited only long enough for suppression to take effect, then committed. The engagement was violent and short. By this point, the clock mattered. Not because anyone was watching it, but because the enemy no longer had time to respond. The remaining defenders were reacting individually rather than as a system. The 13th bunker fell with less resistance than expected. Smoke lingered longer here, trapped by the terrain. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Shapes moved indistinctly through the haze, friend and enemy momentarily indistinguishable. The 14th was last. Its position had once anchored the entire defensive sector. Now it stood isolated, its supporting positions already gone. When it was engaged, the result was immediate. Then quiet. Not complete silence, but the absence of organized fire. The sector held. Later assessments would estimate that the 14 bunkers had been neutralized in less than half an hour. The exact number of minutes varied by report, but the effect was undeniable. A position that had resisted bombardment and repeated assaults collapsed under sustained, close-range pressure. The line stabilized. Reserves moved forward. Medics followed. And only then did the costs begin to surface. The immediate aftermath was stark. 14 bunkers, each a hardened point of resistance, lay silent. Twisted metal, shattered wood, and scorched earth marked their destruction. For the Marines, the ground they had gained was measured in yards, but in lives, it carried far more weight. Casualties were unavoidable. Even with specialized teams, exposure to enemy fire, debris, and the sheer physical effort of repeated assaults took a toll. Reports from the sector recorded multiple wounded and a few fatalities among the assault teams. Every step forward had been paid for in human energy, fear, and endurance. The tactical impact, however, was immediate. The collapse of the bunkers opened a corridor across the defensive line. Infantry units no longer faced concentrated fire in that sector and could advance with fewer interruptions. Artillery observers could now see previously hidden Japanese positions, adjusting fire with increased accuracy. The pace of the broader operation accelerated. Commanders noted the effectiveness of two-man weapon teams in after-action reports. While risky, these units demonstrated that small, coordinated groups could neutralize entrenched defenses more efficiently than larger forces moving without specialization. This assessment influenced subsequent operations across similar terrain, shaping assault strategies on fortified islands in the final months of the Pacific campaign. Yet the psychological effect on the Marines was profound. They had moved through repeated exposure to lethal fire, clearing position after position in rapid succession. Those who survived carried memories of confined spaces, sudden explosions, and the fleeting glimpses of enemy soldiers only moments before destruction. It was the kind of stress that left a lasting mark, one often recorded in quiet testimony long after the battle ended. At the same time, Japanese defenders were forced to reevaluate the sector. Their doctrine had emphasized patient, overlapping resistance, but the sudden collapse of 14 interconnected positions within 30 minutes exposed vulnerabilities. Tunnel networks clogged with debris. Fields of fire left unoccupied. Reinforcements arriving too late to make a difference. And yet, the battle was far from over. While this sector had fallen, other parts of the island still held. The strategic lesson was clear: even small units acting decisively could disrupt entire defensive schemes, but cost and risk were inseparable from success. Beyond immediate casualties and tactical gains, the broader consequences of the assault were felt across both forces. For the Marines, the success of the two-man weapon teams validated training and doctrine under extreme conditions. Commanders emphasized initiative, coordination, and speed in after-action reports, noting that small units could produce outsized results when operating with discipline and courage. Subsequent operations integrated similar teams, refining assault techniques on fortified positions across other contested islands. Experience from these actions directly influenced later Pacific campaigns, including Okinawa and the smaller atolls where entrenched defenses slowed progress. On the Japanese side, the psychological effect was acute. The rapid loss of multiple bunkers undermined morale in adjacent positions. Commanders observed hesitation, a rare phenomenon given the entrenched culture of endurance and duty. Tunnel networks that had been meticulously planned for flexibility were now clogged with debris, smoke, and the remains of defenders. Communications broke down, and remaining troops could no longer coordinate suppressive fire effectively. Reports from surviving Japanese soldiers, recorded post-war, emphasized the shock of losing multiple positions in quick succession. They described a sudden, almost surreal breakdown of the defensive system, a phenomenon rarely seen given the months of preparation invested in the sector. While propaganda and post-battle narratives often downplay such events, internal documents corroborate the tactical collapse, emphasizing the role of coordinated small-unit assaults. For the broader campaign, this localized success allowed the Marine forces to maintain momentum. Positions that would have stalled infantry for hours or days were cleared in minutes, enabling continued forward pressure across the island. The cumulative effect reinforced the strategic approach of combining concentrated small-unit assaults with supporting fire, shaping operational doctrine for the remainder of the Pacific theater. By the time the dust settled, the significance of these actions became evident. Decisive, coordinated efforts by small units could overturn prepared defenses, alter local morale, and accelerate broader operations. The implications extended beyond the immediate battlefield, influencing planning, tactics, and soldier psychology alike. And while the ground was held, the human and operational cost lingered, preparing the stage for reflection on what such actions truly meant for the war and the men who fought it. In the quiet that followed, the battlefield revealed more than its shattered bunkers and scorched earth. It revealed the limits of fortification against initiative, courage, and coordination. A handful of men, moving deliberately yet relentlessly, had altered the shape of an entire sector, demonstrating that even the most prepared defenses could be overcome, not by sheer numbers alone, but by precise action under pressure. The two-man weapon teams symbolized the convergence of human endurance and technological adaptation. Their success was not miraculous. It was the product of training, planning, and an understanding of both terrain and enemy behavior. They were instruments of necessity, calibrated for impact in confined spaces where ordinary tactics faltered. For the men themselves, the experience left an indelible mark. Close-range combat, rapid successive engagements, and the intimate immediacy of death and destruction forged a resilience few could have anticipated. It tested fear, trust, and physical limits in ways that shaped not only the outcome of this assault, but the mindset of soldiers who would carry these lessons forward. Historically, this episode illustrates a broader truth. Warfare is measured in both grand strategies and small, decisive actions. A single sector, a single team, a few minutes, these could ripple outward, influencing campaigns, shaping doctrine, and redefining what was possible in combat. It is a reminder that history is composed not only of sweeping movements, but of precise, human-scale decisions executed under extreme conditions. The bunkers lay silent, the ground secured, and yet the meaning of their collapse endured far longer than the battle itself. In those brief minutes, the interplay of technology, courage, and circumstance created a moment that would echo in strategy, memory, and the study of warfare for decades to come. And in that silence, the story of men confronting impossible odds remains as vivid and instructive as ever, a testament to the persistent, exacting rhythm of war.